Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Donaldson and I'm a Customer Success Specialist here at Cisco. In today's how-to video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use a Bootstrap configuration file for plug-and-play discovery in Cisco Catalyst Center. So what is a Bootstrap configuration file? Well, it's really just a bare-bones network configuration that's applied to a device to allow it to have network connectivity and to have connectivity to the plug-and-play server. The Bootstrap file is just a plain text file which can be saved in local flash on the device, or it can be on a USB flash drive which is plugged into the device. The file itself has to have a specific file name, and it can be either router-confg or cisco-rtr.cfg. So this method is a workaround for situations where either DHCP is not possible for you to use to onboard a factory default network device, or it's not a desirable scenario where maybe you have security policies that prevent you from doing this. Finally, we consider this a low-touch process rather than a zero-touch process because it does require some hands-on interaction with the equipment beforehand. Okay, so let's talk about the prerequisites that you would need to perform this onboarding process. First of all, you will need a Cisco router or switch in a factory default state. This is important because if there is any configuration saved on the device in NVRAM, the plug-and-play agent will terminate its onboarding process. Secondly, we'll need a Bootstrap file that is either loaded into local flash or is on a USB flash drive connected to the device. And then finally, that Bootstrap configuration file will have to provide network connectivity, just enough information so that the device can get on the network and be able to reach Catalyst Center. The device will have to have connectivity to the Catalyst Center server on SSH protocol on port TCP22, the SNMP protocol on UDP port 162, the network time protocol on UDP port 123, and also the HTTP and HTTPS protocols using TCP ports 80 and 443. On the right side of this slide, you'll see an example template of what a Bootstrap configuration file might look like. All right, next let's talk briefly about what this lab topology will look like for this demonstration. So on the right is a drawing of what our lab topology looks like, and our Catalyst Center server is in a shared services network that's a separate layer 3 network from where our device is that's being onboarded. For onboarding here, we're going to be using a Catalyst 9500-16X switch, and we'll be attempting plug-and-play discovery using the Gigabit Ethernet 00 management interface. We'll be using the Bootstrap file method instead of using DHCP. And as I said, the Catalyst Center server will be in a separate shared services network, so we do have to have some IP routing capability enabled. All right, let's go take a look at our demonstration. On the left, you'll see a text file, and this is the cisco-rtr.cfg file, which has been copied over to the switch in my lab. And you can see that this file is very simple. We have the hostname command, we've established an IP domain name on the switch, and we're configuring a static IP address on the Gigabit Ethernet 0/0 interface. I've enabled IP routing, and I've created a default route that points at the gateway that we'll be using for our IP connectivity. An important point to note here is that I'm specifying a VRF of management-VRF. This is a virtual routing and forwarding routing table, and it's basically a partition of the global routing table on any Cisco device. That means that routes in a VRF are completely separate from routes in other VRFs. And this is configured by default on every management interface on a Cisco network device. You can't remove this VRF, and you'll always have to use it on the management network. However, in practice, if we're using in-band VLANs, we don't need to bother with VRFs. Finally, we're going to create a PnP profile and give it a name. In this case, I'm just calling it DNAC because this is the default used by Catalyst Center. Within that profile, I'm creating a transport that will use HTTP and IP version 4, and I'm telling it what IP address to reach the Catalyst Center server at. Also, an important note here, I have to specify the VRF in this case because I'm using the Gigabit Ethernet 0/0 management interface. If I were using an in-band VLAN like VLAN 1 or 10 or 100, I would not have to specify this VRF because we would probably be using the global routing table. So that's the simple Bootstrap configuration file. There's really not much to it. And I'll show you on our switch that it is actually in Flash. And here you can see I have a new copy of the file in Flash. I also have an older version from previous demonstrations. And if I look at the contents of this file, we'll see that it matches what's in the text file on the left. So the file is in Flash. It's actually saved on the device. And typically I would be saving this to a USB flash drive and then plugging it into the device. This method does work, but it does require that you factory reset the switch after uploading the file to it. So, as I mentioned, we need to factory reset the switch now. And this process is going to take quite a bit of time, so we'll fast forward through it as it goes. But there is a simple command that can be run on any modern version of iOS XE, which takes care of all the factory resetting. And that command is PnPA for plug and play agent space service space reset. When we run that command, we'll be prompted to confirm that we actually want to erase the configuration and reload this device. And yes, we do. One more important point here, I am connecting to this switch from an out-of-band connectivity system using the serial console interface. I'm not SSHing into this device. If I was, I would lose connectivity with it immediately once it erased its configuration and reloaded. So we'll kick this off and wait for it to finish. But what we'll do is scroll back through these log entries and just spend a minute more talking about them. So let's go up and look for the first one that's of particular interest. And that's this log entry here where we see a PnP file copy was completed. And that file was copied to the PnP info PnP xsvc-cert directory. So a file was copied over, but what's important here is to note that we're using the PnP profile named DNAC, which was in the configuration bootstrap file that we initially put on the device. We also have the IP address that we're connecting to, and this is our Catalyst Center server at .202.101. And most importantly, we're using TCP port 80. So that means that we're using the unencrypted HTTP protocol, which we talked about initially. That first connection has to be unencrypted because we don't yet have the certificate for the Catalyst Center server installed on this switch. So once that connection is successful, the certificate is downloaded and then installed in the device, and the plug-and-play agent software will reconnect to Catalyst Center, but this time using the HTTPS protocol. So here we see the log entry that looks very similar to the previous one, showing that we've copied a file down. We're using the same profile and the same Catalyst Center server IP address, and this time we're using TCP port 443. So that tells us that we are using the HTTPS protocol, and this is an encrypted connection. All right, well, that concludes our demonstration of plug-and-play onboarding using a Bootstrap file. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our YouTube channel. And I also have a link here to the Bootstrap resources, which explain some of the concepts around using the Bootstrap file. However, it is a rather old document, but many of the details contained in this documentation are still relevant today. Thanks for watching.